The latest Fox News poll says 6 months into President Trump 2.0, the political tea leaves are muddled. The president's approval sits at 46%, down from a high of closer to 50% in March, but better than where he was in April. 32% think the economy is good or fair. That is the highest that number's been in over a year. 44% say their personal financial situation is good. That's the highest that number's been in nearly 4 years. White House spokeswoman Caroline Leavitt recently said,
in 6 months' time, the president has delivered on those two core campaign promises. Inflation is now running at a 2.1% annual rate. You look at our southern border, look at the numbers. Just last month, 0 illegal aliens were released into our country.
Still, 7 in 10 say inflation is hurting their families. The number Caroline Leavitt was referencing there is from April. In June, inflation hit 2.7%. A majority is dissatisfied with the direction of the country, and a majority does not approve of the so-called Big Beautiful Bill, with nearly half convinced it will hurt their families. Within the president's job approval, when broken down by topic, just 36% support tariffs.
It shows you the power of messaging.
Fox News Sunday anchor and host of the Live of the Bream podcast, Shannon Bream.
Because there's a lot of work to do for Democrats and Republicans. Democrats have been very, very good at saying, you don't want Medicaid cuts. This big, beautiful bill is terrible. It's not going to be good for you. It's going to hurt innocent people. When you poll questions like, do you think people in the country illegally should be on Medicaid? People are like, no. And Republicans are like, well, that's what we're trying to cut. Do you think able-bodied people who could be working and are young should be on Medicaid? Well, no. That polls, very much in favor of the GOP. Well, the GOP is not doing a good job of emphasizing those parts of the bill. I think it turned into the optics of this thing's just getting jammed through. It's going to help rich people, where, again, by the IRS's own nonpartisan data, the 2017 tax cuts benefited every bracket. So Republicans have a lot of work to do during the August recess, because they're going to get hit at these hometown halls, if they're willing to hold them, from people who think you're helping rich people, you're hurting vulnerable people, where when you poll on factual information that's in the bill, there's plenty that's good for Republicans, but they got to work on messaging.
Speaking of messaging, Shannon, you've mentioned it a couple times on this podcast with us that tariffs are bringing in a certain amount of money, but it's his lowest polling approval at 36%. Speaking of messaging, would it help to remind people, hey, we are actually bringing in money from these tariffs? Or is it just, look, I'm going to the grocery store and it's still just really, really too expensive. So things get conflated, right? Like tariffs aren't helping me.
Right, exactly, because the real poll is people going to put gas in their car, get groceries every day. I mean, that's the stuff that people who are not looking to the nuances of all of these rescission fights and everything else on the Hill, it's the real world data check for them that's the most important. But you're right. I mean, there has been this net of influx money from the tariffs that's been coming in. The markets haven't crashed. By contrast, they're doing great. Again, most average Americans are not looking at the market indices every day. They're looking at their bank balances. Yeah. And so you can tell them good things are coming. You mentioned the perk up in a little bit of positivity with regard to the economy. But it's still that daily check for people, that real world check that's hard. The tariffs, I mean, we're in better position than we were with many, many countries in these places where the deals have come together. But there's so much work still to be done on that front. And really, until the China piece of the puzzle gets resolved, I think that the skeptics out there are going to keep telling us this is not a good situation.
Okay, speaking of tariffs, we did have a pretty big week, actually, speaking of these deals. It doesn't sound like they're super finalized yet, but we have a lot of movement with the Philippines, Indonesia, but particularly Japan. Howard Lutnick was on with Sean Hannity this week, and he said they're basically going to give us $500 billion to do whatever we want with, kind of. And Lutnick said maybe we'll put that towards producing our own antibiotics, which that's a whole other podcast in and of itself. But this is moving along, right? That we can say to a certain extent, even though the EU isn't wrapped up, and even though Scott Bessent's meeting with his Chinese counterparts in a few days, some things are starting to move.
Yeah, and when you have big trading partners like Vietnam, Philippines, Indonesia, Japan, getting close to or actually getting these deals across the line, those are significant. And yes, China is that big piece of the puzzle that everybody wants to get to. Bessent's going to have those talks in Sweden, I believe it is. And so, they've got to inch closer. I mean, that is where we are vulnerable. And China knows it with some of the things that they produce that we must get from them, rare earth minerals and other things that isolationist would say, like, why do we have all this? Well, there are other countries that can do things that we can't do or have resources that we don't have. So we've got to work out a framework and agreement with them. And China is definitely the biggest part of that puzzle. But keep in mind, there is this week also, I believe it's the 31st, I think, if I've got the date right, on that this appeals court is going to hear this case over whether or not the president actually has the executive power to do what he's been doing on tariffs. Remember, he lost that in the district court, that federal court that said, no, you've gone far beyond the Emergency Powers Act. You can't do this. And some of the countries put the brakes on, like, wait, if U.S. court system is going to tell the president he can't even threaten us with these tariffs and they don't count, why should we negotiate? So that appellate court hearing is going to be on the 31st, if I'm correct. And that has a chance to upend everything the president's trying to get done on tariffs.
Back to the Fox poll for a second, Shannon. It also asked Americans if they feel the federal government's been transparent about Jeffrey Epstein, and 2/3 said no. And the administration is shifting on this now, asking federal judges to unseal grand jury transcripts. They're not successful there so far, but Department of Justice attorneys interviewed Epstein's former girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell, in prison. Attorney David Marcus said she answered all questions and didn't invoke any privilege. This story isn't going anywhere, is it?
Yeah, and we may finally get some more information from Ghislaine Maxwell. Remember, she's on a 20-year prison sentence in my fine hometown of Tallahassee, Florida. And there are apparently conversations being brokered with respect to the DOJ. What did they get from her? Her brother apparently has reportedly been talking to some of the media saying she's got, quote, new evidence. But it's hard to imagine after what she was put through on the stand that she would have new evidence. That maybe she's just newly ready to talk about some evidence that she has. You know, I interviewed Alan Dershowitz last week, who was at one point a Jeffrey Epstein attorney. He says she knows everything. She is the trove of information. He says there was never a formal client list, but she knows everything about arranging travel, who was on the plane, who went to Epstein Island. She knows all of that. And if she now realizes that there's not hope for overturning her sentence, and she does still have an appeal pending at the Supreme Court, they've not decided on that yet. But if it becomes apparent to her that she's not going to make headway with that appeal, maybe she's willing to talk in a different way than she hasn't before. And if she's under a subpoena from the House Oversight Committee, that's going to be some additional pressure, which also, you know, allows her and her attorney to say, like, hey, we were just complying with what, you know, legally we had to do. Her attorney says she will always testify truthfully and she is willing to talk. So we'll see what fruit that bears. You know, the president has felt like from the beginning, of course, there are pictures of him with Epstein, but they had a falling out at some point that Trump felt he was, quote, a creep in the early 2000s, and that relationship did not continue. Democrats have to remember they're excited because they feel like, oh, Trump's name is through evidence. It's through documents. Well, of course, I'd be surprised if it wasn't, given the relationship they publicly had. But there are a whole lot of Democrats who are in those files, too, whose names are going to be dragged back through it. So they may push for the transparency, but you need to be careful what you wish for. And it just seems on the White House and Trump administration side of this thing, maybe the story could have been quieted by you saying ages ago, instead of stop talking about Epstein and you're a dingbat, there's nothing there. We'll give you every single thing. Here's a flashlight. Let me help you look.
Also, Shannon, this week, our Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, said former President Obama and his intelligence officials created a false narrative that Russia was trying to help President Trump get elected and released this changed narrative after the 2016 election. She's referred them criminally to the DOJ. There's been quite a bit of reaction, flat denials from people like former President Obama about this. And it sounds like at this point it's up to Pam Bondi where to go from here. But Shannon, would the Supreme Court's presidential immunity ruling apply here to President Obama?
Yeah, it could very well. I mean, if you even get that far, if you had some type of action, some type of pursuit against President Obama, yeah, that immunity decision is good for every president. So if he can say, listen, this was connected to my official duties. This is not, you don't get to go out and rob banks and say, well, I was president, it doesn't count. No, this is your official duties as president. And I think that President Obama's legal team would have a very good argument. He was trying to get the best intel assessment. He was asking them to go back through to make determinations. I think that it would be a very strong defense to anything that would actually come together. I think that this is another place where the Trump administration has to be careful to manage expectations. You see the outcry of people who thought they were going to get much more on Epstein than they have been able to get, and that's created a real problem. But you know, when you have the DNI coming out and putting this information out there to a lot of people looks super questionable. And we all have questions like, why was this assessment held and then there was a new launch? Was this the predicate for leaking information to media sources that were friendly to the Obama administration to undermine the President Trump? Like, there are all kinds of questions there. But when you say you've referred the former president or potential issues regarding the former president to the FBI, you do have to caution people. I think most of us in Washington think it's highly doubtful you will see Barack Obama in handcuffs, arrested by a SWAT team, and facing federal charges or jail time in court. So I think you got to be careful to manage that for your base, who would, some of them maybe like to see that, and just give them a realistic look at what potentially could and couldn't happen.
Finally, Shannon, Democrats met with Mahmoud Khalil, the former Columbia grad student who was taken into custody by immigration officials. He has a green card to be here, but he helped organize those campus protests at Columbia against Israel. They got out of hand, largely intimidating and threatening and harassing Jewish students. He is out of custody per judge's order, but he has since met with a slew of Democrats. The same week, he would not condemn Hamas during an interview.
And this is a problem for the party because they've also got Zohran Mamdani, their mayoral nominee for the Democrats in New York City. They're having to answer uncomfortable questions about language that people use, things that they're saying, things they will and won't condemn. And it's got a lot of establishment, middle of America Democrats very nervous here in Washington. They don't want to be having this public spat with the more progressive wing of their party. They don't want to have to be answering any question about whether they would or wouldn't condemn, phrases like globalize the Intifada or do you approve of Hamas. That's not a headache the Democrat Party wants to have, but they've got this very progressive wing that says this is the right place to be, this is where we want to be, and they're very vocal. They're very, a lot of them, they tend younger, they're very good on social media, and that creates a problem for them. You'll have some people like the DNC chair, Ken Martin, say we've got a very big tent. We want to hear from everybody. We don't agree with everything, but there's room for those conversations. But Democrats would much rather be talking about Epstein than they would about the Intifada and about Hamas. And, the real accusations of anti-Semitism they were facing over the last couple of years, that's not going away for them either. That's their Epstein.
Fox News Sunday Anchor Shannon Bream, thank you.
Great to talk with you, Jessica.